Welcome to the Breakpoint Podcast and our Q&A segment, Ask the Colson Center. I'm Shane Morris, and I'm here with John Stonestreet, answering your questions. These questions are based on Breakpoint commentaries and podcasts that we've aired over the last few weeks, short courses we've held, and articles and columns that we've posted. If you want to submit a question of your own, you can email us at askthecolsoncenter@colsoncenter.org. And John, here just a few days after the election, we thought we would have a verdict. We thought we would be done with this, but we're not done with this. It appears that legal wrangling and social media wrangling and media wrangling are just continuing. And if anything, it seems to be heating up. And so naturally, we're getting some questions about what we think about all this, what's going on, and and how does a Christian approach all these confusing claims that are just bombarding us from every direction. So I want to kick it over to you here, John, because you've been getting some of these messages, and I think you have some thoughts about how we can deal with this as Christians.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people that are really concerned, and those people range from those who are just absolutely certain that this election was stolen and that the president was actually reelected and that we don't have the right counts, and those who are just going, well, I'm hearing these kind of rumors of things on various media outlets. And then we also have a dominant media establishment that just quickly announced that there was no fraud and there's no evidence of fraud, and that all the evidence that comes up of being fraud is not evidence of being fraud. And the fact of the matter is, this is still very, very much a moving target. Now, it's hard to see. I will join kind of the voice of many other folks who say, look, the margins are as such in the states that really matter in terms of the electoral college total, that it's going to be really hard for recounts, like, for example, it looks like they're going to happen in Wisconsin and Georgia, to change, to cover up that margin. Of course, there's a whole set of rumblings going on about certain voter machines being found out, sending the votes the wrong direction. I haven't seen enough confirmation of that to know whether that's a viable accusation or not a viable accusation. The fact of the matter is, though, what we have seen now is 2 straight election cycles in which the American population is doubting the results, systemically, refusing to accept it. That tells us a lot more about America than it does about any particular election. For a group of people that now are saying accept the results, that spent the last 4 years questioning the results, all the way up until this election, by the way, it doesn't give that side a lot of credibility. For a group of people who at the last election said, well, he's our president and we won't accept anybody other than our president, and these election results are fraud if he's not president, that's not trusting the system either. There's been much said about how our founders recognized the kind of population that was required for this kind of form of government to work. And I think, as we've kind of been pointing out for several years, people like Solzhenitsyn pointing to the sorts of character issues that the American population has in general, it's getting harder and harder to see that this is not a long decline, in a collapse direction. We're not the sort of populace that can properly steward the kind of freedoms that we enjoy. We're not the sort of self-governing, strong individual communities where the results of national elections have less of an effect on us because we have such strong civil societies within, various states and within various communities. That used to be a feature of America, and now it's the exception. We used to be a community, strong communities, because we had strong families. That's not been a feature of the American experiment now for a couple decades, and we're dramatically seeing that. I had a wonderful conversation on the Breakpoint podcast. I think it'll air this coming Monday, or maybe the following week, with somebody who's been observing this from an academic point of view. And he points that out, that this is just not something that we have strong dads, and without strong dads, everything else falls apart, So all of this, in my mind, is very, very much connected. You have a deep sense of distrust between the American population and media, and you know what? Rightfully so. a media that refused to take that refuses one whole side of the story and accepts one other side of the story. Now, this is coming in the context of one side of the story that often peddles things that are conspiracy theories and not really true. And so it's kind of like the boy who cried wolf when we, yell treachery, treachery, treachery. When there's real treachery, we may not ever be able to know. And I think this is a real moment in which we're seeing again behind the curtain of the American people, of the sort of civilization, the sort of societal norms that we have. And it's just getting harder and harder for me to believe that it's sustainable. I mentioned this to some friends prior to the election that, if there were a President Biden, that would be the most safe short-term scenario for American cities, because conservatives don't tend to burn down cities. A President Trump would have resulted in the militarization of American cities. And we would have had plenty on the right cheering on as the protests become violent and as police officers and so on have to step in, and even National Guard and military. And of course, I'm talking about a hypothetical scenario that I think probably would have happened, right? And may still happen if something crazy, for example, happens in the courts and this election gets overturned. We're going to see that. And we would have conservatives cheering that on, and I would be here mourning, because militarized cities are not a good thing, right? They may be a necessary thing, but they're not a good thing. The breakdown of civil society. Look, if you rely 100% on the federal government to be the thing that determines whether the world is going right for you, if you look to this election or this leader, I feel like we've talked about the political illusion so much, we're kind of blue in the face about it. But it's so important. If we truly believe that all of what is possible or all of what is good in our lives will depend on who's in the White House or who's running the government or on what federal programs solve our problems or what a court decides, that is an indication in and of itself that something's deeply broken. And there is a loss then of self-determination. There's a loss then of building strong families and local communities. And so I think all of this is pointing to this once again. And also, again, just the loss of trust in our culture is absolutely remarkable. We have lost the ability to know who to believe, to know who to trust on issues that are incredibly important. Look, if there is widespread problems in this election, whether it's enough or not to overturn the results, then it needs to be known so that we can somehow, create trust. If there's not, that needs to be known. And we can't keep saying that there is if there's not, and we can't keep saying that there's not if there is. But I don't see any way around this, because people aren't going with evidence. People are going with preconceived political notions that best serve their political purposes, because both sides are relying on the federal government to be the source of what is good. And I think that is a revelation of something that's deeply wrong in the American population. So I don't know if this is really an answer other than it's a mourning. It's a public mourning. We're not okay. Let me just say it again. We're not okay. And it's not going to be the current election results or the overturning of the election results that are going to solve the problem. If I may quote Chuck Colson again, it's going to be the church being the church. So this is a remarkable opportunity for local engagement. This is a remarkable opportunity for Christians to be Christians. And we can do that. We can actually do that at the same time as being good citizens on a federal level. And let me just say this, just on a mechanical level, Shane, I think it's important to recognize that the Trump administration has every right, if they see instances of problems, to point those out, to bring lawsuits, and so on. They have every right to do that. What's unfortunate has been the language and the conclusions that have been announced, that there is obviously a problem here and that the election results are therefore invalid because of the problem. And to announce that before it's clear, I think has only added to the problem. I think, and by the way, the optics are bad on it. So honestly, I think that that's only made things worse here. So anyway, that's a whole bunch of thoughts. I'm not sure I ever got to specifically answer the question, who do we trust? Because the answer is, I don't know. At least in terms of that information, I don't know who you trust.
Yeah, I could go on for just about as long, John, but I think we probably ought to get to another question. We're going to have plenty of chances to talk about this in the future.
Yeah, we're going to hear more about that one anyway.
I would just give one parting piece of advice here, and that is, if you find yourself in a state of panic or in a state of fury because of the stuff you're seeing on social media, the best solution is probably just to get off for a while. Just get off. Just live your life. Attend to the duties that God has placed before you. Love the people around you, and I think you'll find yourself calming down a lot. And that's not just a life-saving measure for yourself. It's also a recognition of the fact that you're not going to do a whole lot by sharing and retweeting a bunch of stuff and by arguing with people. And I struggle with this probably more than the average person. I love to argue with people on social media. I love to get on there and
really?
And
sure?
sort of put on the boxing gloves. Yeah, I know it's a surprise,
really?
John, but
Shane?
Yeah, that's me. And there are definitely times, and have been times recently, when I've had to just sort of step back, shut it off, not answer any messages or notifications for a while, and just let myself simmer down. But typically when I come back to it, I find that things were not nearly as urgent or as dramatic or apocalyptic as I thought they were, and my involvement was not, after all, crucial.
Well, confession is the first step in recovery, Shane, so I appreciate that.
Well, let's get to a question here from we received during a webinar with Bill Brown with the Colson Fellows. This person says, this was actually a Colson Fellow, or a Colson Fellow in training, I should say. If someone says science has proven there is no God and therefore no need to believe, how would you respond? It's a really basic question, and interestingly, it goes along very well with some of the stuff that I've been learning about, studying recently in my systematic theology course in seminary. So I'll take a quick crack at it first here. The first question I would ask this person, if they claim that science has disproven there's a God, is how? How exactly has science done that? The very nature of science is that it investigates physical causes, physical laws, and it sort of extrapolates those and makes predictions on the basis of them. The idea that science could actually disprove the existence of God is a very interesting claim, and the first thing I'd want to know is how do they think that proof has come about? What are they looking to as a scientific discovery that's obviated the existence of God? They may say something like, well, the Big Bang proves that the universe brought itself into existence. No, it doesn't. The Big Bang is nothing but an admission that the universe had an existence. For most of history, scientists believe, or at least most of history since the Enlightenment, scientists believe that the universe was eternal, that matter was eternal, that it had just existed forever, and that was the answer to the idea that there was a God. Well, we now know the universe is not eternal. We know that matter did have a beginning. Space and time had a beginning. And then so then you can roll right into the cosmological argument and say, well, if space, time, and matter had a beginning, then they must have had a cause. And that cause must have been spaceless, timeless, and immaterial. Well, what fits the bill for that kind of cause? Stephen Hawking says gravity, that doesn't make any sense, and I've seen a large body of critique against that assertion. But ultimately, it has to be something that very much fits the description of a creator. So I would say interrogate that very hard right at the start. People will make this claim. I want to caution as well. People will often make this claim as a sort of hedge against the moral claims of religion. And I often repeat the story that Tim Keller says, where he often talks to college students who come back after their freshman year, and he invites them out for coffee, and they get to talking, and he says, well, how's your faith? And they say, I got to be honest, Pastor, I'm having real doubts. My professors were teaching me about evolution and about the Big Bang and naturalistic causes for the universe, And it seems like science has really just shed a lot of doubt, cast a lot of doubt on the existence of God. And he often, at that point, sensing something else is going on, asks him, okay, who are you sleeping with? And the point of that is that often these so-called scientific objections are really just rationalizations or cover for something else that's going on in a person's life. And you should be very discerning about that, because take it from me, I've sort of gone up against objections that are really motivated by something beneath the objections, and it's like playing whack-a-mole. There's always some new rationalization to justify the life that a person has chosen to live. And the last thing I'd say is that we need to be very careful to separate science from philosophy. When someone makes a claim about what science tells us about morality, or what science tells us about ultimate meaning, or what science tells us about human identity, quite often what they're doing is philosophy. They're not doing science. Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, is a giant exercise in bad philosophy. It has very little science in it. And so we should be very careful to sort out those claims from the kind of claims that a scientist could actually make. And you will find, John, as I have found, that the deeper you get into the sciences, the more deeply you question those who actually have scientific training and are actually working in a specific field, the more modest those kinds of claims become. The more radical philosophical claims about what science tells us pertaining to God typically come from popularizers, and that's why my mind goes straight to Richard Dawkins.
You almost will never hear a skeptic that is a trained scientist say something like, science has proven there is no God. The reason you won't ever find that is because science doesn't deal with absolute negatives. It's not something, absolute negatives are not scientifically provable. Because what that would require, just take, for example, to say that science has proved there is no God, it would require someone being at all places at all times, throughout all times of history, and God wasn't there, right? In other words, science is based on observation and hypothesis and testing, and so you test, and the only way to test that, because if you're like, well, I was in outer space and God wasn't there. Well, maybe God went somewhere else while you were in outer space, or some of. In other words, but see, science gives you this very limited means, not an unhelpful means. Don't get me wrong, a very helpful but limited means of acquiring what is true and what is real and what is knowable. And in order for it, with its mechanism, to give you that conclusion about God, you would actually have to be God, because the only way to prove that there is no God is to be at all places, at all times, which is God, right? So that's kind of how that works. So you usually, I think, and I was just looking at the way this question was framed, you're going to find scientific folks that are, kind of get the science more, and that was kind of what you were dealing with. They're going to say something much more like, science makes God unnecessary, or science has explained everything, God just is filling in the gaps. And what we're finding is if somebody actually goes that far and is that sophisticated, you're in a good time of history, because what we're moving to more and more quickly are people acknowledging the limits of the current explanations for what exists, the current cosmological and biological explanations for what exists. It's having trouble explaining the level of intricate design, what's called the irreducible complexity, and this is all the work of the intelligent design folks. And we just did a Breakpoint commentary, we'll link to it in the show notes, pointing to a peer-reviewed paper that was published, that was quickly apologized for, of course, in Smithsonian Magazine, demonstrating, look, this is pointing to some sort of a designer, capital D, and getting to that conclusion out of the limitations of the current mechanisms for what exists. They just can't explain what is. So you have to have, and another way to say this is, you have to have a cause that is sufficient to explain the effect. If you walked out of your church sanctuary one day and the pulpit was sitting upright, and you walked in and the pulpit was laying on its side, you wouldn't think, our pulpit decided to take a nap, right? In other words, you see the effect, but that cause isn't sufficient, right? So that's what we're seeing. So when someone makes that more modest claim, good news, you're at the right time of history. Just wait. There's going to be more and more of this headed in the right direction, because Darwinism in particular, which is the dominant mechanism for biology, and Big Bang, which is a dominant explanation for cosmology, it just isn't explaining what we see.
Yeah.
If someone says that science has proven there is no God, you can, and actually says that, you pretty much can assume they don't know what they're talking about scientifically. And because in the easiest response is just, what science? What scientist? Where have they ever done that? Because you just don't have scientists saying that sort of thing. And so by asking a couple questions like, well, what science has? What scientist has? What would it take to prove that there is no God? What do you mean by God? What do you mean by science? These are wonderful ways to kind of carry on that conversation. We've got, by the way, a What Would You Say video on this that has just done really, really well. Been seen a couple 100,000 times and shared all over the place, and we'll link to that too at breakpoint.org. And if you don't know about What Would You Say, this is a set of videos that answer one specific question every week. We put a new one out every week. Been doing this for about a year. Have about 25,000 people that have subscribed to this. And this is one of the most exciting things that's happening at the Colson Center. You want to help us with it, that would be great. We're working with a lot of different organizations, a lot of different sponsors to answer specific questions. We've answered questions about sexuality, about economics, about critical theory. That one has done particularly well in recent months because of that challenge. And then this one, has science proved there is no God? That's actually one of the What Would You Say videos that's there. So we'll link to that at breakpoint.org.
Was that actually the title of it, or was it the Science is Settled one?
Well, we have one on both of them.
Okay.
We'll just link to both of them, and people can find it. But the one I'm thinking of, and I may not have given the right title, but the one I'm thinking of specifically talks about whether science has made the belief in God unnecessary.
Right. Yeah, those are great. And good answer, by the way. Thank you. So we've got another question here I want to get to, and this is, we rarely do questions that are just openly adversarial or open challenges, but I think this one's probably helpful and illustrative of a certain way of thinking, and we're not going to beat up on anybody, but it gives us a chance to make some good points here about this particular issue. So I'll just go ahead and read the comment. Will you also defend the rights of the babies that grow up to be gay once they have grown up? If not, you're a total hypocrite. To social conservatives, a fertilized cell supposedly has rights, but not one that grows up to be gay. What kind of sick, twisted thinking is this? I'm pro-choice, not pro-abortion. You are not pro-life, you are pro-birth, pro-forced birth. Okay, this sounds like something that you would hear during like a man on the street session, or if you were out in front of an abortion clinic protesting, or even if maybe you were dealing with protesters at a crisis pregnancy center or something. This is kind of the frontline, spittle flying, red face argument that you often hear in the context of the abortion debate. So, how would we respond graciously, yet very yet rationally and convincingly to an accusation like this?
I think we should mention there's a lot of capital letters in this.
There are a lot of capital letters.
There was a lot of caps. Now, I read this, and we've been thinking about this for a couple weeks. Not because the questions themselves or the challenges themselves are all that challenging, but what's the best way to respond to this? This is really obviously not coming kind of from a place of good faith, but a place of anger and a place of hurt, and certainly understand that. I think there's probably two ways to respond to this question, and hopefully this will be indicative of how we Christians ought to respond in general. When you have this kind of kind of frantic typing of a question, you can answer what's actually said, and then you can also answer what they actually meant. And I don't want to presume the motives, and maybe we'll hear back from this questioner, which we would love to do if they still listen. I don't know, but let me just walk through the specifics, and then maybe back up and deal with the overall question that I think that they're asking. Again, here's how it goes. Will you also defend the rights of the babies that grow up to be gay once they have grown up? Question mark. The answer, of course, is yes. We defend the rights of babies that grow up to be gay to not be killed. And that's the question of abortion. The question of abortion does not have to do with whether you embrace any other right than the right to not have your life taken as an innocent victim. That's what abortion does. The fundamental question of the abortion debate does not have anything to do, and it never addresses what a baby will grow up to be. What it has to do with is what the baby itself is when it's in the womb. It's the great question that Greg Kokel talks about, which is a very real part of my life right now. If your 3-year-old walks up behind you and says, "Hey, Dad, can I kill this?" My daughters never did this. My son is already kind of headed that way. The question is, what is it? What are we talking about? So the answer to this first question is absolutely. I don't think any gay person should be killed for the sake innocently. In the same way that I don't think life should be taken of an unborn child. No pro-lifer, no social conservative I know of thinks that somehow an unborn child's life should be protected and a gay grown-up's life should just be taken. No one I know believes that. So this is really just not a. And the question goes on. It says, what kind of sick, twisted thinking is this? It's sick, twisted thinking. If somebody actually thinks that, I just don't know anybody. I don't know anybody that does.
Yeah, there's a conflation going on here too between, if I could sort of step into the devil's advocate, there seems to be a conflation going on between the quote unquote rights of a person who identifies as gay, which I think this question would probably say includes things like the right to redefine marriage, the right to be treated as whatever this person identifies as, the right to be to have their relationship recognized in law and approved of. Those are the kinds of rights that this listener, this questioner, is probably talking about. And then we often encounter in this case this accusation that if you don't recognize these rights, then you want this person dead, or you want this person to commit suicide, or something like that. That's often the sort of arm twisting that we see. We don't buy that. We say, no, we absolutely support this person's real rights, but we don't support the person's ability to invent new rights out of thin air and then sort of impose them on everyone else. We don't have to approve of life choices or identifications in order to support the person's right to life.
Yeah, and that's where I was going to go in terms of what question we think that they're actually asking, right? Yeah. Which has to do with more of kind of being gay and then having the right to do whatever I think that I should be able to do in order to live out that lifestyle. But what society itself says that citizens can't do whatever they want, and they draw lines in various places, and they draw lines on various places based on various realities. And I think that the conversation around gay rights needs to be completely re-examined, because I don't think it was examined well to begin with. I don't think we had a national debate, for example, on same-sex marriage. I think we're having that debate right now on whether everyone should be forced to participate in a gay wedding or in some aspects of the gay lifestyle if they don't want to. And one might counter then to this person who is kind of conflating the right of the someone who is gay to live as they choose. I might counter and say, well, what about the rights of those who aren't gay to not be forced to live in a way that they don't choose? So you have to adjudicate all of these things, but to equate it somehow with abortion is just wrong. Now, I do want to hit one more aspect of this, because in the middle of this, there's in caps, you are not pro-life, you are pro-birth, forced birth. And that is something that is a different sort of argument. It has nothing to do with the gay question, but it has to do with whether or not pro-lifers care about life after birth or not. And there's two good answers to that. Number one is, statistically, they do. Statistically, the couples that are adopting children in need, statistically, the couples that are giving more to charity and humanitarian work are religious people, many of whom are pro-life. So to say that pro-lifers don't care about babies once they're born actually is observably false. But also, if they didn't, it actually wouldn't change the moral action of taking the life of an unborn child. So let's just say, somebody advocated for, not killing 2-year-olds, and somebody responded, well, you don't really care about 2-year-olds unless you care about 3-year-olds. And let's say Yeah, I don't care about 3-year-olds. I don't care one bit about 3-year-olds. I'm not going to give a single dime to help 3-year-olds. I'm not going to give my, fig bar as a snack to a 3-year-old. It ain't going to happen. Would we turn around and go, well, then let's kill the 2-year-old? I mean, in other words, it's such a leap in logic, even if it's true, which it's not, that pro-lifers don't care about, on average, don't care about babies after they're born. Now, does every pro-lifer care about the human person like they should? Are there plenty of people who, in Martin Luther King's words, care so much about the cause, they don't care about the actual individual? Of course there are. But you know what? On average, it's just not true. The most generous giving people in the world, particularly to causes having to do with children. I mean, I just think of what was that Twitter thing? Again, I can't believe we're going back to Twitter, but the Twitter thing a couple months ago. Do you remember that, Shane, where somebody goes, hey, pro-lifers, if you care so much about the unborn, tell me what you're doing, to care.
That was a
for
mistake.
Do you remember that?
I do.
And then like 25,000 responses were like, well, here's what I'm doing, and here's what I'm doing, and here's what I'm doing, and here's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And some of them you're like, man, these people deserve sainthood. And some of them you're just like, oh, yeah, I'm doing that too, right? I mean, in other words, it was just being done everywhere. So it's really a tired accusation that's not born in reality. But even if it is, not caring about a born person doesn't mean that the unborn person life should be taken if they are indeed human. And that takes us to embryology and science, which points us to that, not to mention theology and philosophy.
Yeah, if you are at all of a progressive mindset and you want to issue a challenge like that on Twitter, please check out that case first, as well as the case of the president of France when he said, "Show me the woman who who having 7 kids also has an education and a career and such," because you will immediately regret issuing that challenge. Don't do it. But yeah, I mean, am I pro-birth? Absolutely, I am pro-birth. I am against killing babies in the womb. Denying that that's a valid cause is like saying you can't be against sex trafficking unless you have, a house full of trafficking victims and that's your full-time occupation. It's like saying you can't be against genocide unless you are taking in genocide victims or are dealing personally with all the systemic causes of genocide. Are those great things to do? Absolutely, they're great things to do, but they're not prerequisites to being against killing innocent people. That's just a bad argument, and we shouldn't accept it.
No, and saying you're not anti-slavery unless you actually cared and fed and educated and did all that other stuff, right?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, all of those examples are really good examples. And you know what? The consistency of our moral position doesn't actually address the legitimacy of the moral position itself. Mm-hmm. The consistency of how we uphold what we believe doesn't change whether what we believe is true or false. And that's really what we're getting at here.
Well, that about does it for today, folks. Thanks so much for listening to the Breakpoint Podcast. We'll be back next week answering more of your worldview questions. So drop us a message on social media or email. Ask the Colson Center at colsoncenter.org is the address, and we'd love to engage with your questions. For John Stone Street and the Colson Center, I'm Shane Morris. We'll see you next time.